Well, we'll get started, man. I appreciate y'all joining. Aaron, there's another chair right there if you want to grab it, Bo. We're glad to have you guys here. We're glad to be here. It's been a really, really tough conditions week weather-wise for fishing anywhere in this region, probably anywhere mostly in the country, I think.
Especially yesterday.
If you look, yeah. Well, and if you look what's been going on at the last couple of professional tournaments, you know, like right now they got the Lake Open going on, and, man, there's a lot of guys not catching anything. They got the FLW Toyota Championship happening in Lake Cumberland in Kentucky. Why they thought when they did the reschedule for that it was a great idea to go to Kentucky in December, I'll never know. But there's guys up there. One of our own, Skeeter Fowler's up there. I think he's sitting on 0. I know he was after day 1. I didn't see what he did today. But, you know, it just it's tough, man. It's tough, and it's tough here too. Fortunately for us, tough here is a little bit different definition of tough, right?
No doubt.
Because me and Dave went out yesterday. We went over to Martin Creek. Neither one of us really been fishing Martin Creek. I fished it.
I've never been there.
The last time I fished it, it was still basically summer. I mean, I was still in shorts and a T-shirt and sweating. And we went over there with not talking to anybody, no knowledge, and we were able to catch like
17.
17, was that what it was?
Yeah, I had a 5 something and a 4 something.
Yeah.
And he caught him. But it was
yeah, I did. I
front-ended
front-ended
all day.
And every time anybody that gets in my boat, unless you're a paying customer, you will get front-ended. I mean, that's just it's gonna be a little.
I will attest. Hey, you think it's bad this time of year? Do it in the spring.
Wait till your sight fishing time.
Yeah.
You're gonna be like sitting dead still, throwing in the
head over there by Tiffany's.
Yeah. Or the worst.
No, I haven't seen it yet.
The worst version is I'll be like.
It was a 3-pounder on the back.
No, the worst part is I'll see a bed and I'll be like, hey, you see that bed and that fish shit on it? Don't throw it that. Don't throw it that. We got to turn back around and set up on him. Then I'll sit up on him and start throwing it.
Hold the camera.
Yeah, there may be a little bit of guilt in that. I think it's getting over-exaggerated a little bit, but there may be some truth to it. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Anyways, back on track. We're off the rails in the first couple minutes, which is pretty standard around here. But, you know, it is tough conditions. We've had literally, I mean, it's tough as it gets. I mean, we had a 5-day cooling trend, and that's what's making it so tough, guys, is not the overall water temp or the time of year or any of that. It's the trend, and you'll hear us talk about this as we go forward throughout the winter and get closer to spring. The trend is what matters this time of year. When the water gets cold, it's the trend. Whether it's 60-degree water, 50-degree water, or 40-degree water, it's the trend. And what you've had this week, we talk about in the spring the warming trends, right? When we're getting to the end of winter, we start talking about warming trends in January, February, March. And what we always say to look for is you got to look for the nighttime temperatures. When the nighttime temps never get below the water temp. So if you got 50-degree water in January or February, the water's 50 degrees, and you get a few days where the nighttime temps never dip below 50, well, that means the water temps climb during the day, maybe slightly climb or stay level at night, and then climb again the next day. And so the water really has a chance to trend upwards temperature-wise. Well, the same thing is true, very much true right now, going the other direction. When the daytime temperatures never get above the water temperature, well, that's when your water temps will really start to decline in a massive way. And what we've had is literally a week where the daytime temps pretty much haven't gotten above the water temp all week long. Because we had water in the 60s when we got to last weekend, and then we haven't seen 60 degrees in, what, 6-7 days now, right?
Yeah.
We haven't seen a 60-degree high all week. And a lot of 40-degree highs like yesterday. Yeah. That was fun.
And I forgot my snowsuit.
He did. We got all the way out to Martin Creek, got out of the truck, and Dave was like, dude, I did not just do this. I'm like, that's going to suck for you, Pods, because we going fishing. I didn't drive all the way out here for nothing. Now, but yeah, so that's what makes it so tough. It's not necessarily that December fishing is tough or winter fishing is that tough. It is, generally speaking, less bites and all that in the wintertime. But it's the trend, guys. The trend is what, if you want to know what to expect, kind of how you need to fish, how you need to attack throughout the colder months, you really need to pay attention to those trends. Because if we get a few days here in the next week or two or month or whatever, if you get a few days where the nighttime lows don't really get below 60, which is unlikely to happen in December. But if it does happen sometimes in Texas, if you get a little warm spell and you get 2 or 3 days in a row where the nighttime temps don't get below 60 or don't get below 55, that water is going to trend up and you can fish totally different. And whereas last Monday, the water temp may have been 62 or 61 or 60, and you had to fish really methodically and really slow and grind out bites and beg for bites, you may have 53-degree water that trends up to 57 or 58, and you can go wind them up. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the water temp can actually be colder, and you can have a much more active fish when the water starts trending upwards.
What about pressures? Like
barometric pressures.
Barometric pressure.
Yep.
And we dealt with that yesterday when I checked on the way over. It was 30.18. Not ferocious, but still, up there.
Since we've been out, it's been hovering back and forth.
Yeah.
I've been watching it since we talked.
Yeah, but you'll find that on situation, deviating from what he's talking about, in situations like that where when the pressure's up, the bite is compressed into a more narrow window during the day at some point in time whenever the pressure is higher. You will still get some bites. Most of the time it's in the afternoon. But what he's talking about here too with the water temps, you can also pan that into the macro, meaning that over a 3 or 4 day period, this can also happen. Not necessarily a month trend or a 2 month trend going into the spring where the water starts to gradually do this and it's climbing over the course of several days. And I'll give you a perfect example of this is going to be coming up next week. I think we have a lot of days in the 60s next week. So what's going to really, in my mind, going to come into play a little bit more might be the shallow bite.
Yeah.
And because of what he just said.
Definitely going to stabilize next week with, and so just like we talked about, the trend is important. Well, one part of the trend is the stabilization of the water temperatures in the water column. So whenever you start getting, what we'll have next week will be, you'll have daytime temperatures above the water temp and nighttime temperatures below the water temp. Well, when you get that for a lot of days in a row, that creates a really stable water temperature throughout the water column, because you're having a natural cycle of a little bit of a climb during the day and a little bit of a decline at night. And so while you may not get a warming trend next week, you'll get a stabilization of the cooler trend. And so what you can expect to happen is 5, 6, 7 day cooling trend we've been experiencing, fish shutting down, traveling back, sucking back into little deeper parts of shallow water. Some of the other fish on the main lake sucking off the structure, getting down in deeper water, trying to get a little bit warmer, and really just pulling down and getting inactive because their metabolism is slowing down from what it has been. They've been feeding at a certain rate. Now their metabolism starts slowing down as the water temps continue to drop. So the fish get inactive and kind of suck down. And then when the water stabilizes, okay, now they've kind of stabilized and they'll kind of slowly get back into a better feeding pattern and just more normal life for them. What's going to happen is these fish, especially like the shallow to mid-depth fish, they've been kind of predominantly dropping back into creek channel drains, low spots, stuff like that. Well, they're grouped up. Once they get there, they're not wanting to bite on this cool trend, but when the water column stabilizes, now you've got fish in a group that are a little more willing to bite. All of a sudden, it's going to get a little bit better. It's going to get a little bit better. And then if you get a warm trend that really kind of activates their metabolism, then it can get really good. And that's why the trend is, that's kind of all the flows of the trend throughout winter, and that's what makes following the trends so important. It's so important. And then the pressure, to go a little further on that, the barometric pressure, the part about that's, kind of nature flowing together is typically your higher pressure days are going to come on your cooling trends. Right? Because your highest pressure days are going to come after a cold front passes this time of year. Now in the summer that may not be the case because it may be a warm front, different things in the summer. But in the wintertime, your pressure will be highest after a cold front passes through, which is going to be your coldest daytime highs, which is going to be your cooling trends. So typically the barometric pressure is higher on the times when it's cooling and their metabolism slows down, and all that combines to make you go, man, is there any fish in this lake, right? The answer is yes, there is. And that brings us around to what we're going to talk about tonight, which to me, for where we live in the South, in East Texas, and even all across the South, one of the best baits that you can throw, and one of the reasons it's one of the best baits is because there's always shallow fish throughout the winter months. Always shallow fish. And this is a bait that you can fish really, really shallow or even to mid depths in a lot of cases. And it's a bait that just draws a bite. It's time tested. It's been around forever. this was my father's favorite moving bait on earth was a lipless crankbait. And that's what we're going to talk about. And I've been exposed to it since I was a kid. I grew up down in the southeast Texas region, which is close to Rayburn. And Sam Rayburn is a place that, I mean, they call a lot of these colors have been called Rayburn Red. I think every company that makes a lipless crankbait for years had a color called Rayburn Red. Well, that's because throwing red lipless crankbaits was a Rayburn deal. So obviously I've been exposed to it since I was a kid. And it's something that no matter how many years go by, no matter chatterbaits are great inventions, Alabama rigs are great inventions, all these things that come about for better winter fishing, man, there's a lot of times when that lipless crankbait is still the very best option. And there's something about that tight wiggle and all that noise, and especially when that bait hits a little piece of grass and goes, pauses and pops out. Big bass and numbers of bass just can't not bite it. They can't help themselves. So we're going to talk about lipless crankbait fishing, and I wanted to do this with Dave. I haven't rehearsed any of this or pre-gamed any of this. I just told him, hey, tonight let's talk about lipless crankbait fishing. That's all I told him. It was a text earlier because I've been busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest today. But, I mean, you guys that got here before this saw me and my buddy Zach. We're in there working on the computer on the app right up until we started doing this, so I've been real tied up. But I wanted to do this, David, because I noticed when we were fishing yesterday that, come on through, brother. Come on through, yeah. It looked like, to me, the way that you had your setup was different than mine, and the way that you set the hook when you got a bite was different than what I do, and I think that's because you have a different setup. And there really is a couple of different ways to fish a lipless crankbait. In the general speaking way, the general outlook on it is, the first way you can do it is you can overpower your rod to make it easier to deal with grass, or you can fish an underpowered rod to make it easier to deal with the fish. And that's kind of, there's two different ways. And what I mean by that is, if you get heavier line, stiffer rod, it's a lot easier to just do little twitches and get it out of the grass. But when you get a bite, if you go to jerk on them and you go to horse and fish with a treble hook bait, you're going to lose them. So if you've got the overpowered option and you're doing this and the grass is good, you better kind of reel into that hook set, and you better take it easy and play them and get them down in the water. You just better make sure that fish has time to load up and that you kind of handle them a little bit easier if you've got that overpowered setup. Whereas if you've got the bendier rod with lighter line, when that fish bites, you can jerk on them and that rod's going to load up and shock absorb, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to be able to land that fish without thinking about what you're doing.
And that comes from a lifetime of fishing tournaments, is what that, it's setups like this. And actually, when I'm in competition, fishing tournaments, especially at Rayburn Toledo Bend, where I'm using a rattle trap, most of the time I'm using a fiberglass rod. Mm-hmm. And
a lot of people
the reason for that is that using graphite rods, especially like what he was using, this is my guess, I was watching him yesterday, is a much stiffer setup than what I'm using. But a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put,
let's talk about the two different setups, and then let's go into all that. Okay, you want to do that?
So I'm using a lighter setup.
Yeah.
All right. This rod here is a 10 to 17 line rating on this rod right here. And
what's the length on it? And
this is a 7-foot rod, and I'll use 15-pound test line, and that's what I was using yesterday when we were throwing it. When I'm bumping it across the grass, if it bogs into the grass, I can still pop it out of the grass a little bit. But I had times when it did, hook up into the grass pretty good, and I had to really tug on it to get it out. But also too, when that happened a lot of times, that's when the bite happened as far as that goes. But over time, I've gotten pretty proficient at being able to feel that bait through the water and tipping the grass. And I can, if he paid attention yesterday, some of the retrieves are sped up a little bit, some are slowed down a little bit during an entire cast. That will change all the way through, because what I'm after is I want this bait just touching that grass, the tip of the grass, as it comes back towards the boat. And so that's what I was doing. And then when one hits it, I just lean into it. And then I didn't have any problem. Matter of fact, I don't think I lost.
Well, bro, you may not notice this, but the camera will tell the real story. You set the hook on it. Because I noticed it.
That ain't a big swing.
I noticed it, but when you guys, and so this video will come out Monday that me and him went out and shot yesterday. And if you guys watch that video, towards the end of the video, we get on a little stretch where we caught 7 or 8 fish right in one spot on grass, side by side, both throwing a lipless crankbait. And there is a noticeable difference in the way that I pull into them and the way there's more of a snap with David when he gets a bite. But just to compare the setup, so you've got
the rig is lighter.
Yeah, And you've got to, you have to when you do it like that. But it's much easier to fight the fish and land on that setup. I'll give you that. So you got a 7-foot medium to medium heavy type power rod.
It's more medium.
Yeah.
It's a 10 to 17 line rating on this rod right here.
And so what I'm throwing is
I'm telephone post with 38-pound test line.
No, it's got a lot of tip to it, but this is a 7.5, and it reads heavy on here, but really it's a medium heavy, and it definitely has a moderate tip on it, and it does say moderate tip, but mine's a 7.5 rod that is got a much stouter blank. It's really like a medium heavy with a moderate tip, and I throw 20-pound fluorocarbon. Now, what I'll also do is later in the year, as the grass continues to die, and I'm kind of getting pretty close to that point now this time of year, I'll switch over and even go to 30-pound braid on my line, because as the grass starts to get later in the year, the grass will die back more and it'll get softer. Even hydraulic, it'll all get softer. When it's not as alive, the stem gets softer and it gets harder to get your bait through there. So having that braid with even less stress makes it easier to feel that first pressure of that grass and get it out of there without it bogging up on there. So to me, either the thicker the grass or the softer the grass, I need more power to fish it efficiently. In my thought process and the way that I've always done it is, I'm aware that I'm at a disadvantage after they bite. 100%. The way that I set my lipless crankbait up, I am without a doubt at a disadvantage to a rod like this, or even better, a fiberglass rod, once they bite. Right. But I feel like I can make more cast efficiently without getting any grass bogged down. Now, you're a greatly experienced fisherman, and for you can go out there and you can work it through that grass on a lighter rod or a glass rod, but there's a lot of people that when they go out there and they first start throwing a lipless crankbait, they're going to feel like they're just winding in grass all the time if they throw the lighter setup. But if they throw my setup, they're going to lose most of the fish that bite.
Well,
they're going,
and that's the key thing.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing I learned over tournament competition all my life, was that I had rods like this back in the day, and it's your feel is way better. The ability to tip it through and get it through the grass is much, much better, even when you use the 30-pound braid. And there's times in certain grass patterns that you have to do that.
Like coontail,
the loss ratio was much greater. And I mean, there's a lot of times we were losing 6, 7, and 8 pounders on the heavier rods, and we started playing with rods. I'm talking, this dates back many, many years ago, and ended up with the fiberglass rods or even these lighter rods, and our hook ratios were up in the 90% range. And so we struggle a little bit with the grass as far as bogging into it and working it through it. And like you say, you have to adapt to that feel way more perfectly than what you would do with that right there. But at the end of the day, I got more fish in the boat at the end of the day in those tournaments, and so that's why that I gravitate back that direction.
And that's why I wanted to do this with you, because I knew that we would have two guys that have a ton of time throwing a lipless crankbait, because you're from Beaumont.
Yep.
Like, you're right down there in the Rayburn Cut. Like, you're in the lipless crankbait mecca too, you know. And so I knew that we both had a ton of time throwing a lipless crankbait, and we both do it differently. And that is a big part of all this stuff that we do. We do so much instruction on this channel and everything, and we try to help you guys every way we can. But guys, let me tell you, a big part of what you can do is about finding what works for you. There are always different ways to do it when it comes to bass fishing, and we're both sitting here talking about the same exact bait in the same exact areas on the same exact water, and we're doing it differently with our setup. And like David said, for him, he felt like he landed more by scaling down his gear. And for me, there is without a doubt a touch and a feel to getting that fish loaded up on a bigger setup and getting him to the boat without losing him. And David chose to get better and more proficient at working through the grass, and then he knew he could land the fish. And I chose, as I developed as a lipless crankbait fisherman, to get better at loading the rod up correctly and fighting the fish correctly to land him. And it was just, which battle do you want to fight and which battle do you want to make easier, because that's the whole dynamic. And really there's a blend, right? There's a blend that you got to find that works for you, because there's guys that'll throw lipless crankbaits on rods even stiffer than what I throw, and there's guys that'll throw lipless crankbaits on rods even lighter than what David throws, and there's guys that'll be somewhere in between us. And it's really about finding a rod that works for you, where you have the right feel. And the whole key to this deal is what David just said earlier. It's being able to contact that grass and come out of it without having to do this. Because you're not catching one when you're ripping it like this. There very, very rarely will you get on a pattern where fish will bite it when you're ripping it like that. And if you're having to rip it to get out of that grass real hard, you're not going to get as many bites as versus when you're doing this and you just hit a little twitch, just a little snap, or maybe even just a burst of the reel handle will get it through there. Especially when I set up with a braid, I can usually get through that grass and just hit a little reel handle snap and it'll pop on out of there. Because when that lipless crankbait goes, that is what gets your bites, not and it jerks it 10 feet away from him. Because if you think about it, when you're ripping a bait and you got a 7-foot rod, 7.5-foot rod, when you move that bait from right here, when you move that rod from right here to right here, well, think about how far that crankbait just moved. It moved from right out there to right out there. That's about 8 or 10 foot. It's a long ways that you just move that bait. And when you rip it that hard, you're not going to catch them.
The untold story with this, and this is the hardest part of this, is the contour of the grass, the shape, the slope of the vegetation that you're fishing, all right? And that's why that in certain situations, I will always have a rod like this tied on with 30-pound braid like he's talking about, because in some cases, like what we were fishing yesterday was grass that had an outside edge in 5 to 6 foot, and we could see the matted stuff up in 2 foot, but there's a 45-degree slope going out. So you could literally throw it up to almost the matted stuff and then feel it all the way back out. And then I would slow it back down to get more contact. And then the next cast, I would throw it down the line in the 5-6 foot range, slow it down a little bit till I touch the grass, and then work it in that contour. When you get on a lake like Rayburn or Toledo Bend, and we're fishing grass lines there, the outside of that grass line might be 14 foot, 12 foot, all right? With a 45-degree slope, and the grass is going to be thick coming up. And those fish may want, it might be more than just want, they demand that bait hangs up in that grass and you have to pop it out. And as soon as that thing pops out, boom, that's when they hit it. And that's when, if that's what's calling for it, that's why I'll have all the above. I'll have the fiberglass rod rigged with 2 different type baits. I'll have either a medium rod like this one rigged, and then I'll have one just like this rigged with 30-pound braid. So it's no different than drop shots, where I'll have 3 or 4 rigged in the boat and with different
got to cuss at me, y'all.
Different setups and different things to where I need for that day in order
thing you did when we went out
to fulfill that day. And so it depends on the time of the year going in from now into February. I mean, it's always good to have a couple of trap rods tied up, or in this case, the 6 Sense baits tied on, and you can do a lot of damage.
Well, and truth be told, one of the reasons that the lipless crankbait is so great in the wintertime is in the wintertime, the top of the grass starts to die off.
Yeah, exactly.
And it creates that situation that we were into with the tapered grass, and that is really the ideal setup for lipless cranking, is to have grass that tapers down and starts to slowly scatter. That's the perfect situation for lipless cranking. But, you know, let's talk about, so a couple of the things that you can do with the retrieve to help you get what we're talking about that's so important. We're talking about how important it is to lightly hit that grass and pop out of it. How do you get that? How do you achieve that action on the bait? And there are a few things that you need to do with the retrieve that I think are truly, truly important that I see a lot of people do wrong. You know, being guides, we're fortunate. We get to see a little bit of every experience level and how they fish things, different techniques and things all the time. So one thing that I see a lot is people get in the boat and they throw a lipless crankbait out and they'll point it down. They'll point the rod down because they're cranking. You know, like with a square bill or something, we point the rod down and we crank, right? That's not what you want to do. You also don't want to hold it up like this. I see a lot of people hold it up or hold it to the side. None of that is what you want to do. When you're cranking a lipless crankbait, what you actually want to do is point the rod either straight out away from you or maybe slightly up. And the reason that you want to do that is because you've got to be able to pull that bait free from that grass as easily as possible. When you point that rod straight out, it creates a situation where your rod can't bend as much towards the bait. If my rod's up here, my rod can now shock absorb and bend towards the bait, which is going to allow that grass to load up a split second more before it rips out because my rod has more bend in it. If my rod's straight out, I can't bend my rod. So as soon as I start to pull, I'm immediately putting pressure on that bait to come out of that grass. It creates leverage. When you're holding your rod like this, like if you wanted to rip something to you as hard as you could, how would you put your hand out? You put it out here and rip, right? You wouldn't hold it up here and rip, you got no leverage. You wouldn't hold it over here and rip, you got no leverage, or down. You know what I mean? Because down, now there's going to be a hesitation as you come up. It's a very, very, very small fraction of a segment difference that creates that bait going versus that bait getting in that grass. So you have to be like this, and it's one of the techniques where you have to be the most in tune with your bait, because the earlier you feel the pressure of that grass hit that bait, the easier it's going to be for you to get it to jump out the correct way. So point it out, really pay attention, and then as soon as you start to feel the pressure of that grass, snap the wrist, snap the handle, and it'll usually pop out. And when you start getting the time and the feel for that, that's when you're really going to become a great lipless crankbait fisherman.
I'm more impressed than anything that he actually noticed this yesterday. You hear that, folks? I am insanely impressed he noticed that. You know, so yeah, I mean, and
I act a lot dumber than I actually am.
What he's talking about too with the angle I hold the rod. I've had some tournaments before where depends on the architecture of the grass. There's that term again.
Yeah.
And had it to where those fish were actually, if the grass is stalky like this, but it's 2-3 foot under the water, right? And then it's got the slope to it. Those fish were up in the scattered stuff, say in 3-4 foot of water, where the slope went out 8, 9, 10 foot. I've even had it before where I throw that rattle trap up there and hold the rod up. But I was forced to hold it up in order to turn it, doing the same exact thing I wanted to do was make this thing tick that grass and bump into the grass. And so it also kept it from bogging down into it. So you'd hold the rod up here like this and keep reeling. And you could almost close your eyes and do it and just use the rod tip to feel what that thing is doing. And whenever you're not feeling much, what are you going to do? The rod tip is going to start to drop a little bit to get into that position he's talking about. But as soon as it starts bogging, you can pick it right back up. So you can control the level of where that trap is based off of what you're throwing it to. When I throw a cast out to the outside edge of the grass where I know I'm going to be in, say, 7, 8, 9 foot, then I am going to do that. I'm going to drop the rod tap down a little lower until I start feeling that grass, bump it off of it, and I'll move the rod back and forth in order to achieve what I'm after.
That's interesting you say, because that was one thing that I failed to mention was you do have to be able to control the level of the bait to feel for the grass.
Exactly.
And the basic retrieve, and this is with a chatterbait, and this is with a lipless crankbait, and this is also with a spinnerbait and a swim jig in this same situation in the wintertime. I do every one of them the same way. I throw it out there and I point my rod out in the way, and I just slowly, I start off reeling like this, and I just gently slow down, and let that bait continue to descend until I feel the grass, snap it, speed it up a little bit, and then start slowing down again. And that's my way of retrieving it is I'm always slowing down or speeding up the reel handle turn to feel for grass,
and that
or
is
to get it out of grass.
Perfect way to do it.
So it's like going like this.
And it's impossible to teach.
It is. It's a feel.
It's impossible to teach. I had guys last year in some conditions where we were doing that with a chatterbait. Right, and you had to have the speed of that chatterbait, the angle of the rod tip. There was short grass in this area we were fishing, and you had to have the tip of that chatterbait touching that grass. And these other two guys that I had in there, they just were chunking winders. And I had 10 in a boat before they had one. I was doing the same thing he was doing, front-ended me.
Yeah.
And but I was trying to teach them that. See what I'm doing with this, and they notice and watch the difference in what you do with your hand on the reel. And that's one of the first things that I do when I'm watching these guys on TV. I'm not interested in what they're fishing or how. I'm watching what they're doing with their hands and the rod in order to manufacture those bites off of what they're trying to do at that moment. Whether it's fishing shallow vegetation with a swim jig, it doesn't matter. Sinkhole, whatever the case. Watch their hands and watch what they do with the rod tip can tell you a big story. So this goes with a lot of baits like he's talking about, chatterbait, swim jig. Matter of fact, I started off throwing a swim jig yesterday, and what does he do? He pulls this out and starts working on me immediately when we pulled up to the first spot. And I was like, oh boy, you better dig one more of those out because I didn't have one.
Yeah, I caught a couple on the first spot. Then we went to an area where you really couldn't throw these because there's a bunch of pad stems in it.
Yep.
Then we pulled up on the next spot that had some outside grass, and I was like, let's get there. And that's where we caught quite a few of them.
Staging area.
Yep.
It was a perfect staging area leading into what we both deemed as an excellent spawning area. And looking down at the water temp, what the water temp was, I mean, this was the ideal area. So what we did, we went around the lake looking for other areas that were very similar to it.
Martin Creek, for those that don't know, is a heated power plant lake, so the water temps are going to be elevated. And I know all of you guys know that, but some watching might not. So those fish do spawn in December. There's already, I've caught last week or week before last something, I had a video where I was catching one off a bed on Welsh. Welsh is a power plant lake. It's a lot smaller than Martin Creek, so it gets started even earlier in November sometimes. But all these power plant lakes, there will be fish spawning off and on throughout the winter. One thing about power plant lakes, when they start spawning, it's a little weird dynamic, and I don't want to go off on a whole other topic here, but the spawn really spreads out on these heated lakes. They can start as early in November because those fish aren't on a normal water gets really cold, then as it warms up we spawn cycle. They basically, when the water starts cooling off, they got to start thinking about spawning, because there's some years when they're pumping a lot more where it doesn't ever get cold, and so those fish are kind of on a schedule where when that water starts trending cool, they start really thinking about spawning, and it gets down in the 70s or 60s and they get a moon cycle, they jump on a bed, and they don't all do it at the same time. Like literally, I've seen wells with fish spawning in November and off on spawning all the way till April. I mean, I've literally seen that on Lake Welsh, so it can really be a spread out, scattered deal. It's great because it's fun to go sight fishing in the wintertime. That's fun, right? That's cool. When you've been grinding on some cold water lakes, it's nice to go have a day where you can look at them on a bed. That's fun. But it's also, you can't typically, sometimes you can, but day in, day out, typically you can't have an entire day of sight fishing on the power plant lakes because the fish spread out their spawn cycle over a longer period of time. Martin's a little different than our other power plant lakes though, because it's so big. It's almost like you got a hot water lake and then you got an almost normal temperature lake on the other end. So
I could test you right now on something.
Test me. Let's go.
I could really test you on something right now. And it was interesting yesterday too that I noticed. And we got all our bites. The bulk of our bites yesterday came out of what water temp?
Like 63, 64.
I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of you. 63 to 65 degrees. There was some water we saw that were 58. Yep. 59 degrees, we didn't get a bite in it.
That's right.
We fished water that was 75 to 77.
Got a couple little bites.
One little dink in it.
But you hooked another one that was special.
I hooked one that was special?
Yeah, it was like
one that was
the smallest fish I've ever seen on a hook. Now he lost it. He lost it, but it was the smallest fish I've ever seen on a hook.
That's true. Shoe pick story.
But the key to this, and I've noticed this on Welsh, I've noticed it on other power plant lakes also, in the fact that there's bands of water column based off of when you get further away from the discharge or closer to the discharge, where the water is warmer in some places, cooler in other places, and there'll be a band in there. And I've always seen that 63 to 66 degree band almost always is a key zone. And that, I was noticing it yesterday, and the best spot we had, it was 65 degrees. The best spot. So
sure was.
I'm proud of you. You know that.
And even though it was 65 degrees, and that's like prime spawning temp, and I think those fish probably have been really thinking about and doing a lot of spawning in there, especially a week before this, because we've had the cool trend. What we say earlier, it's more important to pay attention to the trend. Even though those fish were in 65 degree water and they've been spawning, because of the cool trend, where we really caught them the best was outside of that spawning area at a funnel point where we had some scattered hydrilla and we could catch them on a lipless crankbait, which is a pre-spawn type of pattern.
Typical staging area.
Yeah, and what happened was those fish were in that pocket when they started cool trending, they went just like we talked about in the beginning. They pull out, they suck down into a little bit deeper water, find some cover, and hold on. And when you get a bait like a lipless crankbait, it can really make them, even though they don't really want to bite, it can make them have to bite because of the reaction qualities out of the grass, like we're teaching y'all how to do. In fact, one guy at the ramp approached me. He said, "Man, how'd your day go?" And for the record, if you ever asked me how my day went, I might have caught zero, and I might have caught every fish in the lake. And my answer will always be, we're catching them here and there. We're catching a few here and there. That's always going to be my answer. And the reason that's my answer is because I was taught that by another fishing guide when I first started guiding out here. He says, because if you pull up to the boat ramp or you're in the parking lot and some customer comes up, some random dude comes up and asks you how you caught him, he might have been with another guide. He might have been out with his buddy. He may be terribly sad about the day he had. He may have had the best day in his life. Somebody's probably going to look bad. It might be you, it might be them, but somebody's going to look bad based on what you say. So yeah, is it a little bit of a deception? Yes, it is. But I always will say I caught a few here and there. And that's what I told this guy. He's like, "Man, it sure was tough. We only caught like 2 dinks all day." And I'm like, I mean, I could see how that could happen. The conditions that we're having, that's likely. I was worried when we got there. I was really concerned that we were going to struggle to catch them. No, we ended up catching, what did you say, 17?
17.
And most of them were small fish, very small fish. But we did catch a couple of big ones. And it cut
some good 2.5 pounders, 2 3/4 pounders,
and we
mixed in there with it.
Yeah, so I mean, we scraped together a good day, but that was because we were able to capitalize on a little brief activity level when the sun came out in the morning, and then found that funnel point. We did get one of those key bites when the sun popped out for a little bit, and I caught one on a frog yesterday.
Oh, that's right, you sure did.
The biggest one was caught on a frog.
Yeah,
yesterday.
but wait, tell them the story about how that happened. It's overcast. All right, it's pretty overcast after mid-morning, and I was throwing a swim jig up in the lily pad.
We'd caught a couple on swim jig.
Caught a couple on swim jig, and I'm reeling a swim jig through the pads, and one came up and blew up on the swim jig and missed it. And Rifleman here just jumps down there and grabs that frog.
Reaction.
The next thing I know, right over there, five-plus pounder just drills it. That was my fish.
Not for long, it wasn't.
But I mean,
Cody, oh my God, it's so funny because we're sitting here. Cody Mays walked behind us a while ago. So the first time I ever took Cody fishing, I just took him fishing and totally going on a little story chasing here, but that's okay. We went out to film a video to honor Cody's brother because Cody's brother gave his life serving the country in Afghanistan. So we were filming a video telling the story of his brother to honor his brother. And we go out that morning. We were just getting a little fishing content to go along with the video. And we go out there and we're fishing this grass line on Lake Athens, and this big fish blows up out in the middle of nowhere. Like, we're fishing a deep pad grass line, and I'm throwing a frog. I think you're throwing a frog too. And this fish blows up in like 10 to 12 foot of water with like no cover, no structure, just open water. And I tell him, throw over there, Cody, throw over there. And he throws over there, but he misses the cast by like 10 foot. Like, he doesn't get right where the fish blew up at. And I'm like, oh, you missed it. So I reel in and I fire over there and I go twitch, twitch, boom. It's like an 8-pounder. It's over 24 inches, like 8 or 9 pounder. Yeah, it was huge.
That's great.
That was like the first time we ever fished. No, that was because you were with me before with Vic that time. Second time.
Funny how a lot of Billy stories have the same result.
Listen, the same result. What David didn't tell you is we were fishing down this lane, and I go, David, you need to be throwing over there in them pads. They in them pads.
he did say that.
And he throws over there and gets the one to blow up. I gave Cody the first cast. I told David, throw in them pads.
Well,
if you miss it and then I catch it, that's not on me.
What I was doing, though, because the pads had a line to it, an outside line.
Yeah.
We were kind of in a ditch.
And we were both throwing down that line. I was messing with him when I told him to throw the pads.
Down the line, and you know, and then he says you need to be throwing those pads. Well, I'm knowing it's shallower up there a little bit, but you know, he already made a cast there, so I said okay. So I threw it out that way, and as I'm reeling that swim jig in, I was like, well, maybe we're missing something here.
I will tell you, I had a lot of fun fishing with Davey yesterday. It was a lot of fun. We gave each other a hard time, and it was about as much fun as I've had in a long time in the boat with somebody.
Are you going into colors on this now?
We're gonna get back on track with the lipless crankbait deal, because I know everybody always wants to know, well, what exact baits are you throwing? I have narrowed it down for me to a few, and I like to do that. I'm not a guy that likes to carry. Now, if you go get in my boat, you'd be like, God dang, you got a lot of tackle. I do. I got a lot of the same stuff, though, because I got to provide tackle for 3 or 4 people. You know what I mean? So I do like to simplify on colors. I don't like to carry. I don't want to think about colors, because let me tell you why I do this. And some of y'all may be guilty of this, some of y'all may not, but if I have too many options, I'll spend half my day retying baits, dog. Like,